maybe.
We don't have any IFU announcements, do we?
Mm, You know, I have some lunch and learn announcements. I should have covered this with you,
Okay.
Ryan. But folks who've already joined us, and then we can mention it again. If anyone has made a pledge
Cool.
to our $30,000 campaign in 30 days, go ahead and do that. It's also not too late to donate if you want to. So Ryan, you can mention that again when we get started.
Sure. I'll try not to forget that. So, I mean, it feels like it's kind of germane.
Okay, here we go.
Currently see 17 active.
Okay, Laura, why don't you, for the folks who are joining, why don't you offer up our political trivia question for today?
Okay, here it goes. Which Iowa state senator's decision not to seek re-election in 2008 prompted Kim Reynolds, then the Clark County treasurer, to run for the state legislature, and from there go on to be Terry Branstad's running mate in 2010? So we'll see. This could be easy for people or it could be difficult. I'm glad you've gotten support for your campaign.
Yes, we have gotten so much great support this year. Thankful to all of you and members and everyone. So yes, drop your answer in the chat for Laura's trivia question.
Yes. You're a very important voice in the landscape here.
Well, we are live and recording. I think more people are going to be joining us. They just got kind of the starting now email from IFU. So Ryan, I think we can get ready, get going, and transition through everything.
Awesome. Thank you, Christina. And we, as always, we wanted to thank you all for joining us today on this day between storms. So good luck, all of you out there digging yourself out a second time this week. I want to thank everybody who has contributed to our $30,000 campaign. We exceeded that goal. If you still want to contribute, I think Christina can put a link in the chat, and we would always appreciate your support and contributions as they help us in our continuing efforts to advocate for small and medium farms in Iowa and against consolidation in the agricultural space. So today we're joined by Laura Belin today. She's the primary author and editor for Bleeding Heartland and part-time correspondent for KHOI Community Radio in Ames. And I think we're going to have a free-flowing conversation, so feel free to hit up the chat, and there's a lot to talk about. So without further ado, have at it. Let's go.
Thank you. Yeah, it's about the busiest week we've had in a long time. So obviously, legislature opened on Monday. I don't know how many people watched the governor's condition of the state address on Tuesday, but it's going to be probably not quite as action-packed a legislative session as last year's, but the governor already introduced a more than 100-page bill related to education that completely overhauls the area education agencies, which provide services to school districts and services to kids with disabilities, and also includes her teacher pay increase proposal and a bunch of other things. But they are obviously putting that bill on a fast track because the changes to the AEAs are supposed to be implemented by April 30th. And the bill, again, was only just introduced yesterday. The governor and Republican legislative leaders have talked about more big tax cuts as well. Not clear at how much they're going to be speeding up the tax cuts that were already passed in 2022 and maybe even before then. It seems like they may not completely try to phase out Iowa's income tax, but they're certainly going to try to lower those rates more. And that, I think, is going to be really difficult for Iowa's state budget to sustain, because we're running big surpluses now, largely because of all the federal assistance that came in through the pandemic packages and the American Rescue Plan. But all of that is going to be tapering off by around 2026. So just when the tax cuts are fully phased in. And of course, the school choice or school voucher or education savings account plan that was enacted last year is only going to get more expensive year after year. We still don't have a final price tag on the first year. It certainly is going to be in the range of probably 130, 140 million dollars, but when fully implemented, it's probably going to be more like in the 350 million to 400 million dollar range price tag. So I want to leave it open for questions, but just really quickly, I don't expect any further legislative action on abortion this year. I think that they are waiting to see what the Iowa Supreme Court does on the ban that they passed in July. And also, I'm very confident that the Republicans are not going to continue to pursue the constitutional amendment they had proposed, which would say that the Iowa Constitution doesn't recognize a right to an abortion, that they don't want to put that on the ballot because they don't want to have the same kind of loss that anti-abortion advocates have had in states like Ohio and Kentucky and Kansas. So I also, I do think that there may be some changes happening. There's been talk about the governor reviving her behind-the-counter birth control proposal. There may be some changes coming to Iowa Medicaid, but I don't expect any major overhaul. In terms of public education, as I mentioned, I think public education is going to continue to be a big focus of the legislature's work, and tax cuts. Oh yeah, the eminent domain bill. I was going to mention that because I'm sure a lot of you are interested in the pipeline issue. I've seen no indication that the Iowa Senate is going to move on the bill that the Iowa House passed last spring. You may have seen that Stephen Holt, who floor managed that bill in the House, just switched his endorsement from Ron DeSantis to Vivek Ramaswamy being the most outspoken Republican presidential candidate against eminent domain for pipelines. So that was kind of interesting. Not that it'll be very impactful in the caucuses, but still interesting to me. So yeah, I'm ready for questions. If anybody joined late, the trivia question that I asked was, which Iowa State senator's decision to not seek re-election in 2008 paved the way for Clark County Treasurer Kim Reynolds to run for the legislature and from there be chosen by Terry Branstad to be his running mate? Yes, I see there's a question. Did the governor put all of her education priorities into one bill? Yes, it is House Study Bill 542. I was kind of surprised that it all was in one bill, but I guess after the legislature passed her huge state government reorganization with very few changes, I guess they decided that they'd rather cram everything into one bill. I don't know. It's very possible that they could break up the teacher pay part and the AEA. I mean, it seems like these area education agencies, they're wanting to move very quickly on that. So I don't know. I emailed yesterday the Iowa House and Senate GOP communication staff to see like have they already given the governor assurances that this bill is going to pass? And of course they didn't respond. They almost never respond to me anyway, but I did ask. So I'm not sure, but it's always possible that they could break up. I mean, there were portions of the governor's education bill last year that ended up not passing as part of that big Senate File 496 that had the book bans and the teaching restrictions and everything. So it's possible they could break up some of it. But the governor did, like I said, I was surprised she put a lot of it into one bill. And there's more than that, but the biggest things in the bill are restructuring those area education agencies so that the money, instead of those education agencies being directly funded, money for special education is going to go to school districts, and then school districts can decide whether to contract with the AEAs or whether to hire their own staff. And then the AEAs are going to be basically prohibited from offering various other kinds of services. And what I'm hearing from people in the public education community is that's going to be really difficult because there are media services, there are crisis management, like what just happened in Perry. But when, for instance, if there's a suicide in a school, the AEA will often send somebody out, a licensed mental health person, to help with that. So that those would all be services that the AEAs would not be able to provide anymore. And it's not clear who would provide those services, especially since most school districts don't have the capacity to have like a school psychologist on staff or a licensed, speech therapist on staff. So a lot of questions about that. Anyway, are there, things are.
Yeah, sorry, we got other questions. We've got questions looking at like the consolidation of power in the state house, removing that from cities and counties, and speaking to what's the motivation behind that.
Well, they've just always, this has just been a long-term Republican project. And actually, there was just a new bill introduced this week that would ban cities or counties from doing basic income projects like universal basic income. I assume that that's happening because Polk County has a pilot project going on. But you know, why would the state step in and say that local governments can't do it? It started, I mean, I can't remember the very first one, but probably the most significant one was in 2017 when they passed a law to say that cities and counties couldn't raise the minimum wage. But they've done it in a lot of areas. They've said that certain types of housing regulations they can't do. And it just seems like whenever a local government tries to do something that is a little bit more progressive or environmental, the state government steps in. There was a bill last year passed the Iowa Senate. It stalled in the Iowa House that would say it was basically no local stormwater ordinances, stormwater plans, or topsoil, I think maybe was part of that. And that would be absolutely horrendous. We didn't mention this in my intro, but I'm also the board president of 1,000 Friends of Iowa, which is a sustainable land use organization. And our executive director and volunteers have worked with local governments on climate action plans, on topsoil ordinances and stormwater plans. And it's very, very important to allow local government to still have the capacity to do that, because the conditions, I mean, the state government doesn't know what the conditions are for every city. And of course, some are much more prone to flooding than others.
Right. And our soil and water commissioners have been terrified about that bill. So
yeah, and I know that there was, you know, I wasn't sure exactly what held it up last year in the House. I remember that so the legislature, the way they operate for most bills that are not tax or spending bills, they have these two funnel deadlines. So the first one is coming up in mid-February. So the first funnel is like bills have to get through at least one committee in one chamber. And then the second funnel is in this year, it's going to be in mid-March. It's usually mid to late March. And the bill has to get approved by one chamber and then through at least one committee in the other chamber to make it through the second funnel if it's not a tax or spending bill. And that was what happened with this stormwater thing last year. The Senate passed it on party lines. It got sent to a House committee. And I assume that there were some Republicans on that committee who didn't vote it out, because it didn't get voted out of committee, but I'm not sure who those people were. But I certainly encourage people to reach out to Republican lawmakers and explain to them why it's really important for local governments to be able to have this capacity, because especially with climate change, and we know, I mean, now we're in a drought, but we don't know, the future could still hold big, you know, major flooding events, these rain events that are, you know, like 6 inches, 7 inches. I mean, local governments really need to be able to have their own plans and not have state government telling them what they can and can't do. But this thing I mean, there have been a lot of things taking away discretion from Iowa school districts as well. Of course, the book ban that's now been blocked by court order, that was one of the classic examples. But it used to be that school districts had much wider latitude to set their own policies. But then the majority party in the legislature doesn't like what a lot of school boards and school administrators are doing. So I mean, that's what's animating this drive.
I
see there's a question about the legislature still locking journalists out from the floor. So this Iowa Senate continues to not allow any journalists on the floor. So those press benches that were in use for more than 100 years, they are now used by staff, and journalists covering the Iowa Senate are up in the public gallery where visibility is poor. They can't get good audio and video. In the Iowa House, many journalists are credentialed to use the Iowa House gallery. I was rejected again. I've been rejected several years in a row now. So I apply and I get rejected. But in theory, journalists are not, as a group, locked out of the Iowa House. I am locked out. I am barred from covering proceedings on the House floor, but anybody can attend committee meetings. So that's generally what I do. Although this week I haven't because of the snow, but a lot of days I'm down there in committee meetings, and I have the same access to the committees as any member of the public.
Have you seen any push to expose the hoarding of federal dollars that pads are surplus, especially, you know, the money that's sitting in? I think I think there's a lot sitting in like idols and other places that.
Yeah, I mean, they seem to be hoarding it and saving it for to cover future tax cuts. But I mean, the thing is, that used to be the Republican mantra is we can't use one-time money for ongoing expenditures, but that seems to be exactly what they're doing. And Iowa has had, I never finished, I had a post that I was trying to work on and I got COVID in May. The legislature adjourned on May 4th and I tested positive on May 5th. So it kind of blew up some of my plans for writing about stuff at the end of the session. But the state law allows the legislature to allocate in the budget up to 99% of projected revenues. And you might think like, revenue projections are not an exact science. So you might think like, well, maybe it's prudent to only spend 96 or 97% or something. But recently they've been spending a lot less than that. So the budget for the current year, they only allocated like 82 or 83% of projected revenue. So they're budgeting to have these big surpluses, but that can't go on indefinitely. Because like I said, when the tax cuts phase in, revenue, like half of state tax receipts come from the income tax. So as they continue to lower the income tax, those revenues are going to go way down. Expenditures for the school vouchers are going to increase by hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And that's a lot in like an $8 or $9 billion budget. And the federal support is going to go down. I mean, there's not going to be another massive CARES Act or American Rescue Plan, just the way the balance of power is in Washington. That's extremely unlikely. So I think we're headed for a Kansas style crash, but I just don't know. It might be like later in the 2020s. It might not be in the next couple of years because they have these huge surplus and reserve funds that they're going to be able to spend down for a while.
Do you see any presidential talking points like on agriculture, like influencing anything at the legislature's level?
I don't really think so. I mean, I don't know. There's always a lot of pandering on ethanol, but they already did. I mean, the legislature already did a big ethanol bill in 2022. And then, like I said, the eminent domain, Vivek Ramaswamy is the only one really highlighting that. And that's just something, I mean, the governor, I believe the governor does not want that eminent domain bill on her desk. And so the Senate is going to do everything just to keep it bottled up. I mean, the fact that they assigned the bill to a subcommittee and they put Mike Busolo in charge of the subcommittee and he used to work for Bruce Rastetter. I mean, that tells you right there, like that. I mean, technically that doesn't meet the definition of a conflict of interest under Iowa law. But like, I believe that in the spirit of a conflict of interest, he should have recused himself from handling that bill because of his prior working relationship with Bruce Rastetter. But in any case, they gave it to him. I think another reason why they assigned it to him is he represents one of the most urban districts. That when you're talking about the Republican Senate caucus, that Ankeny district, it probably has about the least farmland of anybody. So I think that it was easier, the Summit pipeline doesn't go through Ankeny. It was just easier for him to bury that bill. But I'm not hearing, I mean, it is sad. Like I said, it's sad that we are not having co-equal branches of government, because it used to be that even when there was a trifecta, the legislature and the governor would really disagree on things. I mean, that was true during the Democratic trifecta in the late 2000s, but it was also true in the 1970s when Bob Ray was governor and there was a Republican legislature for part of that time. And that was when they were hammering out some of these really big questions. Like, actually, that's when the AEAs were created. It's when our current school funding system was created. And that involved a lot of compromise. I mean, but the current thing that we have is just kind of like the governor's office telling everyone, here's how it's going to be, and the legislature just going along with it. I mean, there was a time when Republican legislators would not just automatically agree to everything a Republican governor wanted.
Well, if they haven't agreed, they've been primaried.
Right. Well, some of them have been, but yeah. And I'm very curious, by the way, I'm watching closely to see how many get primaried, because last year there were, to my mind anyway, there were a surprising number of House Republicans who still voted against some of those priority bills. Now, it wasn't enough to stop them from passing, but there were 9 House Republicans who voted against the school voucher bill. There were a number who voted against the medical malpractice bill. There were 5 or 6 who voted against the state auditor bill. There were 5 who voted against the food assistance bill. And it goes on. There were four or five who voted against that big like the education bill that had the book bans and don't say gay. So, it's, again, like I said, it didn't stop these things from passing, but I'm curious to see what's going to happen, whether the governor is going to just say, well, let bygones be bygones because I got the bills on my desk, or whether she's going to like go after these people. And by the way, this was one of my favorite low profile stories from last year that I don't think anybody else picked up on, but in June, the governor appointed there was a judgeship. I don't know if you know how the judicial nominating system works, is like if there's a district court judgeship, there's a district nominating commission that interviews all the candidates, and they send two nominees to the governor, and she has to pick one of them. So they sent two nominees. One was Dustin Hite, of Oskaloosa. He's a conservative Republican lawyer, former chair of the Iowa House Education Committee, and he was one of those people who lost his primary in 2022 because he had, among other things, he had opposed the school vouchers bill. And the other judicial candidate was like a Democratic trial lawyer. And so somebody flagged this for me. And so I was kind of keeping an eye on it, but I'm like, well, the governor's not really going to appoint a Democratic trial lawyer, but she did. She passed over Dustin Hite, who agrees with her on almost everything and did pass a lot of bills that she wanted. He was the one who ran her bill that banned the school mask mandates during COVID. And he ran other bills that she wanted, but she actually appointed he's not just like a trial lawyer. He was like on the board of the state trial lawyers association. I mean, it was like unbelievable to me. So the governor does, I mean, she is, I would say, vindictive is a word that I would use. I mean, she holds grudges, let's just say, like she doesn't forget. So I'm curious to see what happens in some of these primaries this year.
Petty politics. Yeah, that doesn't bode well.
By the way, Mike Carpenter, she appointed, very, very well qualified. So I don't mean to denigrate him at all. It was just like, I didn't think there was any way that he was going to get appointed, but he did. So.
When are we expecting a ruling from the about the Supreme Court on abortion?
Okay, well, right now they have not even heard oral arguments yet, so they don't seem to have that case on a fast track. I do think that sometime this year they will. So the first thing that they'll consider right now, the state has appealed the district court decision that enjoined the law, so blocked it from being enforced while this litigation proceeds. So the first thing the court is going to do is just decide whether to keep that injunction in place. So they could go ahead and lift the injunction and uphold the law, but they could also just say like, well, we're going to decide on the law later, and for now, we're going to keep the injunction in place. And that wouldn't mean that they necessarily wouldn't uphold it later. So it's possible that they could rule on that this year, but it's possible, like if they just say, well, we're going to let it play out on the merits in lower court and let the injunction, it may not be decided until well after the 2024 election. So it's really not clear when that's going to happen, but it is certainly possible that they'll hear arguments this spring and rule this summer and potentially uphold the law this summer. But another big question that we still don't know is, there was one Supreme Court Justice, Dana Oxley, who recused herself from the last case. That was why it was a 3-3 deadlock, because she recused herself. And so we don't know whether she would recuse herself again. My guess would be that she's not going to, but it's possible that she would. Her former law firm represents the Iowa City-based abortion clinic that's a party to the suit. That doesn't mean she's not required to recuse. I mean, the Supreme Court justices can make up their own minds, but so I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen on that, but it could happen this year, but it really could take a couple of years.
Okay. Do you have a feel for if that governor's education bill, kind of stepping back, we'll go to that, there's a special committee that was formed to deal with the vouchers?
Oh, good question. I actually just looked at that this week. That special committee that was formed, the only thing they did last year was pass the voucher bill. There were no bills referred to it. And yesterday, when I looked in the Iowa House, the governor's big bill was referred to just the regular education committee. So that education reform committee that was created last year just seems to have been a one-off just to get the school vouchers bill to the House floor, but I haven't seen it. I don't expect it to do any other business.
Awesome. There's a whole scrum of things here.
Did anybody else have any guesses for the, I can give the trivia answer if people, unless, or should I give people more time?
Nah, give them the trivia answer. Well,
So Jeff Angelo of Southwest Iowa could have been a legislator for life, but he chose not to seek re-election. Kim Reynolds ran for a seat. Midway through her term, she became lieutenant governor. And then Montgomery County Auditor Joni Ernst ran for the same seat in the special election and was elected, and later ran for the US Senate. So if Jeff Angelo had not retired, in all likelihood, Kim Reynolds, I mean, for all we know, she might still be the Clark County treasurer and Joni Ernst might still be the Montgomery County auditor. So there you go. One of those things. You never know what's going to turn out to be really important in politics. I don't think that Terry Branstad would have picked the Clark County treasurer as his running mate if she hadn't already been in the legislature at that time. Oh, somebody asked about the over-the-counter contraceptives. The governor didn't make a big deal out of that in her speech, but my impression is that they're still working on that. Technically, I know I used to call it over the counter. Technically, it's behind the counter because a pharmacist would still have to prescribe it to the woman. But what happened last year is it got through the Senate, and then in the House, there are still some issues. There are a bunch of House Republicans who aren't happy with that. I know that the chair of the House Health and Human Services Committee, Ann Meyer, she supports it, but I don't know what exactly the issues are with all the people in her caucus. And so I'm not sure. And since the governor didn't mention it in her speech, I'm not sure that it's something she's going to really put a lot of muscle behind. But they are still trying, you know, they're trying to say that they're doing a lot of things for mothers and babies. So it might be something that they try to push this year. But the House is definitely the roadblock on that because the Senate already passed it.
Sure. You know, we've seen a little bit of friction here in the last couple of years about people running for offices that don't live in the district.
Oh, yeah.
Have you seen any traction on that?
No, unfortunately, you know, I've looked into this over the years. Iowa law is really, really lax about residents. So like if you own property or rent an apartment somewhere, you can claim that's your residence. You don't have to prove that you sleep there a certain number of nights a year or that you spend a lot of time there. I mean, there was Jeremy Taylor in Woodbury County. He was forced to resign from the supervisors because he literally, like, the water bills showed that there was no water usage in the house that he was supposedly living in. But yeah, I knew that challenge to Jack Whitver was going to fail because I had already looked into something the previous year. I had looked into something where there were a couple of people who just, you know, clearly didn't live where they were registered to vote. And unfortunately, I talked to several county auditors about it. It's just like, well, or fortunately, you know, whatever, however you want to look at it, but like Iowa law is very generous to people. So if you're wealthy enough to have multiple residences or be able to rent an apartment somewhere that you don't live in, like, you know, probably nobody's going to be able to successfully claim that you can't run for office there. I mean, like, I know every once in a while somebody gets in touch with me and is like, Ken Rosenboom doesn't really live in his district. It's like, yeah, well, you know, I mean, I think he probably did enough to establish residence in it, but I'm sure that he probably still does live on it, mostly on his farm in his old district, but it's probably not enough to be illegal.
Sure. I mean, I had to deal with that too, because I had a primary challenger once and they didn't even live in my district, but they only had to establish residency by the window starting of.
That's right. Yeah. By 60 days before the
Yeah.
general election. Yeah. So that's another issue, but the whole thing, I mean, some states are much more stringent about it than Iowa is, but Iowa has just never, I think that it's something that the legislature doesn't really want to change because, and part of it, I think it's related to the fact that we don't have gerrymandering. You know, if we had gerrymandering, what they do in some states is they just draw the district lines for the convenience of where certain people live. I mean, there have been districts that were literally like they had a notch in it just to allow an incumbent to stay in the district. But since we don't do that, it's inconvenient for some incumbents and they have to move under the new map.
Well, in our closing 2 minutes here, is there anything that would surprise you this session that you are looking forward to?
Boy, it goes so fast. Yeah, I don't know. I just published something by Rachel Bruns about the midwifery and birth centers. And I'm not, you know, it would be nice if the legislature did something good to promote midwifery. I'm a big reproductive rights advocate, but I also think that choice in birth is part of reproductive rights as well. I mean, if for those who are choosing to give birth, they should also have choices about where they give birth. And so I would like to see that. I think that that is like, of the things that I would like the legislature to do, most of them are not realistically going to pass, but that's one that I think possibly could get some traction, and I would like to see that happen. I would be in most of the things that I think the legislature should be working on, they unfortunately probably are not going to be doing. Oh, it goes so fast. Thank you for having me.
Well, Laura, thank
Did
you.
I miss any questions in the chat? I'm sorry. I'm like, it's hard to.
Oh, there's
gun control. Yeah, no gun bills. The only thing I will say is that the bill, so the Iowa House passed a bill last year that would allow people to keep firearms in locked vehicles on school grounds and college campus grounds. And it got through the House, didn't get through the Senate. The insurance lobby was against it. And I think that what just happened in Perry probably makes it less likely. I know that the House Republicans last year were saying like, we're going to keep trying on this thing, but I'm not sure that that's going to go anywhere. But certainly like, and even the Democratic legislators, honestly, they have, some of them have introduced gun bills, but they haven't made that a priority either. And so they haven't really highlighted that as part of their agenda. So I definitely don't think that any new gun safety stuff is going to pass this year. But if the bill that would allow people to bring guns on school grounds, if it doesn't go forward, it's probably mainly due to the insurance lobby and not the gun safety advocates.
Yeah. So thank you, Laura. Thank you for catching that one.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us today. Christina, do you want to tell us about any upcoming lunch and learns next?
We do. We have lots. Most importantly, if you guys have ideas, let us know. We are in the process of scheduling. So next week, we're going to hear about food systems advocacy efforts happening at the Statehouse, how you can get involved. The week after that, pipeline update, the battle against Iowa carbon pipelines with Just Missouri, Iowa Sierra Club. After that, we're going to be talking about Bloody Run Creek. We have lots of good stuff coming up. We'll hear from the state climatologist in February, I believe, about drought conditions in Iowa, the longest since the 1950s. So I'm going to put all of those links in the chat right here. If you have ideas for lunch and learns, I will also put my email in the chat and you guys can offer them there. That's what I have, Ryan.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Christina. And thank you all for joining us. If you want to support IFU, we had the link earlier, so please consider supporting us. And we'll look forward to the wonderful work that Laura is going to put out this year regarding the ups and downs of our legislature and government. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good day, everybody. Stay safe.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.